He said there was a bomb in the briefcase. The crew believed him, and so did 90 passengers. But when Flight M.F.8301 crashed into a fuel truck and burst into flames, investigators found it was empty. So what really brought the plane down? It was the morning of October 2nd, 1990. The sky above Hǎ Mén, a coastal city in southeastern China, was pale and quiet. The weather was clear, the wind was calm, and at Guǎngzhōu International Airport, the crew of Flight M.F.8301 prepared for a short domestic journey. The aircraft that morning was a Boeing 737, Model 200, registration B2510. It belonged to Xiamen Airlines, a young carrier born from the restructuring of China's state-run aviation system. The plane still bore the faded colors of its former owner, CAAC. On board were 93 passengers and 9 crew members. They were headed to Guǎngzhōu, a city less than an hour's flight to the west. There was nothing unusual about the route, nothing that suggested what was to come. Among the passengers was a young man, just 21 years old. He took his seat in row 16. His name wasn't known to the others. He didn't draw attention. His clothes were simple, his posture quiet. In his hands he carried a black briefcase and a bouquet of red roses. No one questioned it. Flight attendants moved down the aisle with the calm efficiency of routine. Seatbelts clicked. Overhead compartments closed. The aircraft taxied onto the runway. At 6:57 a.m., Flight M.F.8301 lifted off. The takeoff was smooth. The sky above the South China coast opened wide. Beneath them, the patchwork of islands, fields, and rivers slowly disappeared into cloud. Passengers settled into the rhythm of flight. Some slept. Others stared quietly out the window. At first, nothing felt wrong, but there was a tension beginning to rise. Unspoken, unseen. It wasn't in the engines. It wasn't in the instruments. It was in the briefcase. Inside that case was the promise of violence, or at least the illusion of it. Just over 20 minutes after takeoff, the young man stood. He said nothing. He began to walk, and from that moment on, the flight would never return to its planned path. He moved slowly down the narrow aisle, steady and silent, as if the moment itself didn't yet know what he was about to do. His hands were calm. One held the black briefcase. The other clutched the bouquet of roses. Red, vibrant, out of place. At the front of the cabin, a flight attendant saw him approach. Her eyes lingered for only a second on the flowers. Perhaps she thought it was a gift. Perhaps she didn't think at all. It was early October, the time of the Mid-Autumn Festival. People brought things, small tokens, gestures of goodwill. She stepped aside, and when the cockpit door opened, the quiet ended. He pushed her back, crossed the threshold, stepped into the heart of the aircraft, where decisions were made and destinies set. Then came the voice, low, clipped, deliberate. "This plane is hijacked. I have explosives, everyone out, except the captain." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The words landed like lead, too heavy to move. The first officer hesitated, then stood. The flight engineer followed. They stepped out in silence, past the stunned attendant, toward a cabin that had no idea what had just changed. Behind the closed door, only 2 men remained. Captain Sam Longvu sat at the controls, a veteran pilot, experienced, unshaken. But even he knew this was not a moment for instinct. It was one for calculation. The man beside him repeated his demand, "Take me to Taiwan." The words were clear, not a request, a command. Outside the cockpit, The cabin remained unaware. Conversations continued in soft tones. The hum of the engines draped everything in a false sense of order. But the order was gone now, replaced by something slower, something far more fragile. The captain didn't respond immediately. He glanced at his instruments, at the flight path, at the fuel remaining. His hands hovered over the transponder, and without a word to his unwanted passenger, he entered the emergency code. 7500. It was a signal, but not to the man beside him. It was a signal to the ground, to air traffic control, to anyone listening. Flight M.F.8301 was now under threat. Back in the cabin, a subtle shift had begun, a quiet tension that grew between the rows, a murmur, a change in the flight attendant's expressions, the realization that something wasn't right. Passengers near the front had heard something, a raised voice, the sound of movement, a door closed too quickly, and though no one could yet say what was happening, a kind of silence began to settle over them, not the peaceful kind, the kind that listens for what comes next. Inside the cockpit, the man didn't waver. He insisted again, "Fly to Taiwan, or I'll destroy this plane." And the captain, still calm, still composed, turned toward him and began to speak, not with panic, not with resistance, but with something more difficult, negotiation. "There isn't enough fuel," he said. "We can land in Hong Kong, refuel, then continue." But the hijacker shook his head. "Number Taiwan, now." The words hit harder this time, edged with something sharper. Fear, perhaps, or the beginning of unraveling. But the captain didn't argue. He adjusted the heading, not toward Taiwan, but slightly westward, toward mainland China. It was a deception, one that might buy them time. Whether the man noticed the course change, or simply believed what he wanted to believe, is something no one can say. What we do know is this. From that moment on, Flight M.F.8301 was no longer flying toward its destination. It was flying toward a decision. The sky outside remained calm. Below them, scattered clouds cast soft shadows over the southern provinces of China. To the passengers, nothing had changed. The flight was smooth. The hum of the engines was steady. No announcements had been made. But inside the cockpit, a silent war had begun. The captain, Sam Longvu, sat inches from the man threatening to destroy everything around them. A briefcase sat at the hijacker's feet. No one had seen inside. But his voice was steady, and his threat clear. He claimed to have explosives. He claimed he would use them. And so every second became a negotiation, not just with the hijacker, but with the reality of time, of fuel, of choices. The aircraft continued its path, but it was no longer flying a direct course to Taipei as demanded. Instead, it began circling, gently, almost imperceptibly, a slow, wide arc over the southern countryside. It was a lie, disguised as compliance. The hijacker didn't notice. Or, if he did, he said nothing. In the cabin, the flight attendants moved with practiced calm. Their eyes betrayed more than their voices. They whispered quietly to one another, kept watch near the front. A few passengers now sensed something wasn't right, but no one stood. No one called out. Fear has a way of making people still. Outside, the plane looped again and again. 40 minutes passed, then more. Each loop burned fuel. Each turn narrowed their options. And with every minute, the margin for survival grew thinner. The captain offered again, to land in Hong Kong. The reason was the same. "We don't have enough fuel," he said quietly. "We need to land, refuel, then we'll continue." The hijacker's response came sharper this time. "You're lying." His hand moved toward the case. His voice rose, just slightly. "You think I won't do it?" The captain said nothing. There are moments in flight, moments that live outside the instruments, beyond the charts, moments when all that remains is instinct and the weight of a decision that no one else will ever truly understand. He continued circling, kept the aircraft aloft, buying time. At some point, the aircraft's location began drifting dangerously close to Guǎngzhōu. Still, the captain held his course. Still, the hijacker sat beside him, unaware or unwilling to believe. Then, a voice crackled through the radio. Ground control had noticed the signal. The emergency transponder code had been received. They were aware of the hijacking now. A message was relayed, granting permission to land anywhere, even in Taiwan if it meant saving lives. But it was too late. Fuel levels were falling fast. The gauges gave no mercy. Whatever options had once existed were vanishing. The aircraft could no longer make it across the strait. They were going to land, or they were going to fall. In the cockpit, the man began to shift. His silence turned to pacing. His breathing grew quicker. He looked at the instruments, then at the captain, then back to the case. He realized something. They were not heading for Taiwan. And in that moment, whatever fragile calm had held him together broke. His voice rose first, then his body. A sudden movement in a space not meant for confrontation. The cockpit, once a place of order and calm, became a battleground of desperation. The hijacker stood shouting now, arms shaking, demanding the impossible. "You lied," he said. "You said we were going to Taiwan." The captain didn't respond. His hands remained on the controls, his eyes forward. The aircraft was already descending, a slow, cautious glide toward the only viable option left, Baiyun Airport in Guǎngzhōu. The hijacker stepped closer, frantic. He reached for the yoke, and in that instant, the cockpit became chaos. Two men, fighting not for dominance but for direction, for the future of everyone, still strapped into their seats behind the sealed door. The struggle was brief, but violent. The aircraft shuddered. In the cabin, people felt it. A sudden tilt, a moment of imbalance. A new kind of silence spread across the rows, no longer confusion, now fear. Eyes turned toward the windows, toward the ceiling, toward nothing. The captain managed to hold control, but only barely. He continued the descent. Below, the city of Guǎngzhōu spread in silence, unaware of the disaster falling toward its edge. Inside the tower at Baiyun, controllers cleared the runway. At least they were supposed to. But procedures, in that moment, failed. Another aircraft, a Boeing 707, was still on the tarmac, refueling. Nearby, a China Southern 757 waited for takeoff clearance. It was all happening too quickly, too late. At 9:40 a.m., the 737 touched down hard. Faster than ideal, heavier than expected. The nose dipped. The captain pulled back, trying to slow, trying to steer. But the aircraft had no more space and no more time. It veered. Then came the first impact. The right wing sliced through the 707's nose. Metal tore. Sparks flew. The world inside the cabin lurched. Passengers screamed, some thrown forward, some pinned. Then, impossibly, the aircraft attempted to lift again, whether it was the captain's final effort or the hijacker's last demand. No one can say. But the engines surged. The nose pitched upward. It was not enough. The 737 struck the parked 757 still waiting at the end of the runway. The collision sent shockwaves through both fuselages. Fire burst through the cabin like a wave. The aircraft rolled, twisted, broke apart. Then, the flames consumed everything. Outside, black smoke coiled into the sky. Inside, all sense of structure collapsed, windows shattered. Seats tore from the floor. The oxygen, the fabric, the fuel, all fed the fire. There was no more direction, no more cockpit, just heat, just screams. And then, silence. Not because the sound stopped, but because the sound became too much. In the final tally, 82 lives were lost on the 737, 46 more on the 757. Among the dead were passengers, crew, the hijacker, and the captain. For those who survived, memory became a burden. Images of flame, of metal, of voices that would never speak again. And for those on the ground, what remained was wreckage and questions. Not because the sound stopped, but because the sound became too much. In the final tally, 82 lives were lost on the 737, 46 more on the 757. Among the dead were passengers, crew, the hijacker, and the captain. For those who survived, memory became a burden. Images of flame, of metal, of voices that would never speak again. And for those on the ground, what remained was wreckage and questions. In the hours that followed, the wreckage still smoldered. Crushed metal lay scattered across the tarmac, torn apart by force and flame. What was once an aircraft had been reduced to fragments, some twisted beyond recognition, others eerily untouched. A child's shoe, a scorched passport. A row of seats ripped clean from the floor, left in open daylight. Rescue crews moved through the debris with careful steps. They spoke little. The silence wasn't one of peace. It was the kind that comes after too much noise. That hollow quiet after screaming has faded, but before understanding can begin. Among the bodies pulled from the charred fuselage, 2 men were found in the cockpit, still in their seats. The hijacker had not moved far. Neither had the captain. Their lives ended inches apart, one seeking control through terror, the other clinging to duty until the last moment. The briefcase that had terrified so many was recovered. When investigators finally opened it, they found nothing. No wires, no switch, no explosive. It had been empty all along. That discovery changed nothing for the families waiting in hospital corridors, for the parents identifying their children through rings or shoes or the shape of a jaw, for the mothers who had boarded with their infants and now had only smoke-blackened bags returned to them. The lie had still killed. The fear, the panic, the chaos, none of it had been imagined. The captain's decisions came under scrutiny, quietly, in closed offices and quiet halls. Why had he resisted? Why not obey and fly to Taiwan as demanded? Would the outcome have been different if he had complied? There are no easy answers. In the realm of aviation, every decision carries weight, but not always clarity. Captain Sam Longvu had been trained to protect his aircraft and his country. He had been told what was acceptable, what was not. And perhaps, when faced with an impossible choice, he chose the only path he could bear. Some argued he gambled with lives. Others said he was cornered by circumstance. But those who knew him spoke of his calm, his precision, his sense of duty. They believed he tried, truly tried, to land safely, to outlast the threat, to save what he could. The official report noted procedural errors, delayed runway clearance, poor coordination between air traffic control and emergency responders, systemic gaps in crisis handling. It also acknowledged a fact that still unsettles many. No one had ever prepared for this. Not really. There were no reinforced cockpit doors, no standardized hijack training, no clear protocol for negotiating with someone whose weapon might not even exist. After the crash, changes came. Quietly, then swiftly. Airports updated their security screenings. Airlines reinforced access to the cockpit. Protocols were revised. Checklists rewritten. A tragedy had forced the system to evolve. But none of it changed what happened on that morning in October. Flight M.F.8301 had departed under clear skies, with a full tank and a routine manifest. It never reached its destination. Instead, it became something else, a moment frozen in aviation history, a collision of fear, duty, and deception. And in the shadows of that memory, the silence still lingers.